Good morning.
Good morning.
Good to see everyone this morning. I understand it is time for us to start. We are in Acts chapter number 22. We'll be starting with verse number 22, but just kind of get a running start in it. You recall as Paul has been there in Jerusalem purifying himself. We talked about all that. He's able to draw the attention of the mob there and address them, rehearse his conversion. And then as it came to the end, and of course it was boiling, it was just, the pressure cooker was getting stronger and stronger. When he said the word Gentiles, it exploded. And that's where we ended up last week. And as we think about some takeaways, and again, if you have something to take away, I think Brian has the mic. And my wife told me, Doyle, we can only absorb so many words. So slow down a little bit. So I'm going to try not to get, because I get rolled up. So I tell him, Brian, I'm like that horse, I'm ready to go to the races. But one thing I think we take away, first of all, is that Paul, he would always speak the truth. And he'd speak the truth with love. And his desire was for those people, his Jewish brethren, those that he had known, those he'd grown up with, those that he had a common belief in, his desire for them was to go to heaven. And I believe we can learn and take away from that we need to have more of a desire to want to help people go to heaven. And we need to approach that with love and with truth. Another takeaway, you look at Paul, his offenses, being the chief of sinners. God can forgive even the chief of sinners. What it takes is a recognition of sin, a confession of sin, a repentance of sin, and turning to God. I think a takeaway as well, when we're in times of trouble, we can trust each other and find help from each other. And that's what he did as he was led back into Damascus after being blinded. He trusted who was his companions, but ultimately he trusted, he turned to God and looking to God for the one who would help him. So that's kind of the running up to where we are in verse number 22. Anyone have any comments or any thoughts? Verse number 22. Acts chapter 22, verse number 22. So here the crowd is. They listened until he said the word Gentile, and then they exploded. And the words he's saying in verse number 22, away with such a fellow from the earth, for he is not fit to live. Now, you recall whenever they first grabbed him and carried him out of the temple grounds, that was their intent. Their intent was to kill him, and they would have if it wasn't for Lysias, the commander, that came and saved them. So as they were doing this, they began shouting. They were tearing their clothes off. They were throwing the dirt in the air and throwing things. It was a mob scene. They were going nuts. You might remember Shimei, and this is when King David was fleeing from Absalom, and as he was flying, Shimei, as he rebelled against King David, he went with Absalom, and as he was going along the side, he was throwing dirt in the air and yelling and screaming, and it's just a way that just going crazy, being upset at what's taking place. The commander then takes Paul back into the barracks. Remember the Tower of Antonio that we looked at last week? He took him back in the barracks where he could find that protection. And we'll examine this man under scourging. You want to get the truth out of somebody? Okay, tell me the truth, or I'm going to hit you again. Okay, I'm going to tell you the truth, right? Well, so under scourging, he was planning to examine him. It says that they might know what's really happening here. Verse 25. They bound him with thongs. Literally, the word here is they stretched him out. They tied him up. Very likely his arms are raised up above his head, ready to whip him. And Paul, as the centurion stood by, we had the tribune, who would be Lysias, and he's the commander of the whole thing. Then you have the commanders under him, and this would be a centurion. His job was to be over about 100 soldiers. So he was down the pecking order, but he was still up there in the ranks. So here he turned to the centurion and he said, we're in verse 25, is it lawful to scourge a man who is a Roman and uncondemned? Kind of like what he's done before, just kind of offhand. Well, not like he's crying or begging for mercy. He brings something to attention that they didn't know before. So, in a trial in the Romans, it was by law that a Roman could not receive punishment until he'd gone through a full trial. And so as he brought the attention to him that he was a Roman citizen, we find in verse 27, the commander then came to Lysias and says, tell me, are you a Roman? No, actually, I'm getting ahead of myself, aren't I? Verse 26. So when the centurion heard it, he went and reported to the commander, this would be Lysias, saying, take care of what you do, for this man is a Roman. Now, you see what the centurion did to the tribune? You know, the lower commander said to the other one, this is on you. It's not me. You told me to do it. It says, be careful what you're about to do. You're about to whip him. This man is a Roman. And so, verse number 27. Here, this would be the tribune. This would be Lysias, the commander of all of them, came and said to him, are you a Roman? So this was a surprise to him. And he says, yes, I'm a Roman. The commander answered him, okay, with a large sum, I obtained my citizenship. And Paul said, but I was born a citizen. Now, under the Roman law, one could purchase his Roman citizenship. Notice what he said. He described how he purchased it. With what? A large sum. Now, there's going to be different charges for different ones who would be to become a Roman. The one that cost the most is one who had been a slave, and he purchased himself out of being slavery and purchased his Roman citizenship. That would be the largest, most expensive one to become a Roman. Now, because you're a slave, does that mean you're not very smart, or you can't? All you can do is menial labor? There I am. I'm starting to go fast. Slow down. No, they're very intelligent men. Apparently, Lysias is a very intelligent man, as he has purchased his Roman citizenship, and he has now moved himself all the way to the position as a tribune, one who's over the whole station there in Jerusalem, over all the Roman soldiers. So he said, I purchased mine. But notice what Paul said. But I was born a citizen. Now, we thought Paul was a Jew. He was a Pharisee, the son of a Pharisee. How did he get to be a Roman too? Can you have a title of being a Roman citizen and also a Pharisee, a Jew? Most certainly. Now, oftentimes, of course, it's speculation. No one knows because it doesn't say specifically. But within the Roman Empire, if you do some great act of deed for the empire, for Caesar or whoever it might be, you have able to accomplish some great deed or something to help the cause, you would be bestowed upon you the citizenship as a Roman. And it would go with the fact that any of your descendants after you would be a Roman citizen as well. Not just a one-time thing, but it was something that it would be a major thing. Where did Paul grow up? Tarsus of Cilicia, right? Of a wealthy city, a city that had lots of commerce, a lot of things. So, the Romans would have been very big in there. So there's a very good possibility that was the case. So here he was. He has a Roman citizenship. I would bring this to our attention, and I've known some who say, well, as a Christian, we don't need to be involved within the world or political world, and running for mayor, running for office or anything. Well, I see that Paul, he didn't hesitate at all. Even though he was a Jew, even though he was a Christian, he took on the rights of and the privileges of the authority that would be carried along with as a Roman citizenship. So, as he said, I was born a citizenship. Look in verse number 39. Immediately, those who were about to examine him, and how are they about to examine him? By whipping him, by beating him, withdrew. Back up. This is a hot issue. We don't want anything to do with this. They withdrew from him, and here's Lysias, the commander, the tribune, was afraid after he found out that he was a Roman. And what had they done to him? They had bound him. So this was, back up, okay, we don't want to cause any more problems. Now, you'll recall during this time, we're looking at about 15 years from 70 AD, when Jerusalem will be destroyed, there's a lot of tension, there's a lot of animosity between the Jewish people and the Roman people. So here's one who is a Jew and a Rome. This is a hot potato, and he doesn't want to stir up the crowd. So they backed away from him. So Paul has been initiated to been now established as a Roman citizen. He has now a different outlook of all those who are tending to him as he's under bonds, as he is in prison, because you're in prison when you're not allowed to go out and do things. So he's being held. So it's been a whole different ball game. And so we come to verse number 30, we find, and this is going to be the very next day, tensions are still very high, would it not be? And here the commander is, he's wanting to know why all this excitement was taking place. What's the real reason, and why was he accused by the Jews? So he wanted to know these things. He released from his bonds, and the commander and the chief priest and all their council were brought together, and Paul was set down before him. This would be the Sanhedrin. How many people, how many men are within the Sanhedrin? 70. Made up of Pharisees, Sadducees, there's priests, chief priests, there's a number of different players within this group, and they'd all be those who are of respect, of authority. Some more crazy than others, most certainly. You remember Joseph of Arimathea and what he did is he took the body of Jesus and buried him. He was a part of the Sanhedrin. We could look at Nicodemus. He's a part of the Sanhedrin, a part of helping bury Jesus as well. Came to Jesus by night asking those questions. So there are some sound, reasonable people there. There are people who are very convinced in what they believe. Are there very different beliefs in that crowd? Definitely so. A Sadducee and a Pharisee are worlds apart, which we'll discuss here as we come now to chapter number 23. Chapter 23, verse number 1. And the last few chapters, these chapters right in here, the division is kind of awkward because you have something set up and then here we go with a speech or something like that. So it's a little the continuity doesn't flow quite like a lot of them you'd think would be from one chapter to the next. But what we're going to see now is God's providential will is going to be accomplished. And we know what God's plan for Paul is right now is to go where? To Rome. He is now in custody of Rome, but he's there in Jerusalem. So what we're about to find now, because of all the excitement that's taken place, Paul is able to proclaim the message of God before lots of different people in lots of different ways. For people that open and reasoning minds that are able to listen, to hear, and understand, and have opportunity for their lives to change. And this is what we're coming to, as we find here before the council. And so, as God uses these people who are trying to destroy Christianity, destroy Paul, God's going to use them to accomplish His glory, accomplish His purpose. And to stop and think, I've got to add, what can we learn from this? We go through life, we may wonder, why is this happening? Why are the turmoil, why these struggles? Well, it's all going to be to God's glory. And what we have to do is get out of the way and let God's will and God's glory be accomplished. Verse number 1. And it begins by saying, Paul was looking earnestly, or it says, steadfast gaze. He was, I like the ESV and New American Standard says he was intently looking at the council. So here's these 70 men. He's sitting down before him, and what is he doing? He's looking and he's catching people's eyes. As he looks around, he's identifying people within this crowd, this crowd of 70 people. It wasn't long ago that he was a part of many of their activities. As a matter of fact, he got letters from them to go to Damascus and apparently many other cities as well. As he was, this intent gaze, he was evaluating the people he was about to speak to. I believe we're going to find within this dialogue right here, he's going to evaluate there's not a whole lot of hope. There's not a whole lot of changing the minds of these people right here as we're going to be looking at what he has to say. So he's watching there, and he says there in verse number 1, men and brethren. So he addresses them courteously. I have lived in all good conscience before God until this day. Now, this is going to be a past perfect tense. It's a past activity that has continued and it continues to continuing to take place. So he's living in his good conscience in the past, and it continues now in the present as he's lived his life. So it's a past activity resulting in the present state is what we could consider now. And New American Standard describes he's done it perfectly. He's done it completely. In what? In what way? In his conscience, in his mind. I want to pause just a moment. You remember Jiminy Cricket in Pinocchio? Everybody remember Jiminy Cricket? The little cricket that's encouraging Pinocchio, and every time Pinocchio tells a lie, his nose grows longer. You remember that story, don't you? Do you remember the part of the story where what Jiminy Cricket tells Pinocchio to do? What should be his guide? Let your conscience be your guide. What happens when we let our conscience be our guide? Well, Paul's conscience was, I'm going to kill and destroy all Christians that I possibly can. Now, we would all agree, and he would agree now, that that would be wrong. But even while he was doing that, he was what? In all good conscience. Our conscience can't be our guide. What can happen to our conscience? I think Paul will describe the conscience as being seared with a hot iron. I have a few places on my especially my tips of my fingers here that I have very little feeling with, and Bobby could relate to not having feeling in our fingers, right? And as we look at it, it has no feeling. Makes it difficult, doesn't it, to perform simple tasks. But when our conscience becomes seared, we can't know the truth about where that thread is or where that nut is as we're holding on to. We can't know because it's seared. When a conscience is seared, it cannot know the true relationship where we are with God and what we need to be doing. So as he's saying, my conscience has been my guide, he's not saying that he's lived a perfectly right life. He's saying that all that I've been involved in, all that I've done has been, in my mind, what is right. Now, the denominational world teaches that one needs to let his conscience be his guide. And I remember a song, we had a VBS song, this would be back in the 1990s, I think, as the song was about let your conscience be your guide. Well, I changed the words of that little song. It's a little song that was coming out, and that's not right. And I changed it to let the Bible be our guide. And that's the guide, not our conscience. So, but the thing is with a conscience that's open and not seared and not hardened like the people he's about to visit with, it would be open to understanding, having a knowledge being taught to it, that it would no longer continue the course, but change the course and living the way it should. So again, Paul's not claiming he hadn't sinned because he had sinned. We look at 1 Timothy chapter 1, verse 15, that he was the chief of sinners, and as he's done those things. Proverbs 14, verse 12, as it describes, there's a way that seems right to a man, but the end of his way is death. So it can seem right, but it's not always right. So as we continue now looking, so he's made this simple statement. You know, what I've done what I thought was right all my life. The high priest Annas commanded those who stood by him to strike him in the mouth. Okay, let's look at this guy named Annas or Ananias. He was high priest, served from 47 AD to about 59 AD. He was in and out. Matter of fact, his reign of power went back long before that. But the Roman government was in control of who was reigning who. So where he had, I'm thinking 4 or 5 sons who he would plug in there as the high priest. During the time that Jesus was crucified, remember Caiaphas as the high priest as well. That would have been his son-in-law. This is Annas, the high priest, though. And as a high priest, what one writer wrote, to say that he was corrupt is to say he was a nice guy, essentially. He was, as one described it, as wealthy, arrogant, unscrupulous. Whatever it took to be for his advantage. Do you know what kind of leader he was, Pharisee or Sadducee? Can you guess? Well, here's a Sadducee. And a Sadducee would find, believes that this life is all there is. So whatever you do in this life, whatever you can gain in this life, that's what it's all about this life. So here he was. He is a Sadducee who is extremely corrupt. And he speaks out and says, strike him in the mouth. Now, to strike someone on trial was, can you guess what? Against the law. You can go to Deuteronomy chapter number 25. It describes that one is under trial, and once he passes, is it deemed that yes, he is guilty of this. Then, and only then, will you then beat him with rods. But that word goes on to say, you can only beat him, guess how many times? 40 times. So it wouldn't be in repute. But it was only after the trial that someone could be struck. So he said, strike him on the mouth. So, okay, here we are, where he sat down there. Paul's looked and examined everybody. He begins to make a statement. Strike him in the mouth. A really great start for an interrogation, is it not? Isn't that a great way to begin an examination such as this? So let's see how we get off to a really good start. Rude interruption for one, but also is against the law. We can find that kind of trial, that kind of thing taking place in Jesus' trial as well. Verse number 3. So Paul says to him, and I don't think this would, we talk about how Paul's always cool-headed and speaking straight forth. This I don't believe without missing a lick. He popped this out, and I'm going to stress that in a little bit, but it is going to be very, very powerful, what he says. God will strike you, you whitewashed wall, for you sit to judge me according to the law, and do you command me to be struck contrary to the law? And we can go back again to Deuteronomy chapter 25. That's against the law for them to strike him. So he says, God will strike you. And what has he called him? A whitewashed wall. Now, what do we know about whitewashed walls in Jesus, who described those who were like a whitewashed wall? They would be a what? Starts with a hip, ends with a crit. A hypocrite, right? As Jesus talked about the hypocrites. And what would be whitewashed? A tomb. It was a place where people were buried. And so someone would come up to that tomb and think, oh, look, nice clean wall here. I'll lean up against. You touch the tomb, you become clean. So a whitewashed wall is what he's referred him to. You are a hypocrite. Very pointedly, you are a hypocrite because you judge me to be struck according to the law. And it says, God will strike you. And it's interesting. And do I have the date written down here? I don't know if I wrote down the date. But Annas, the high priest, was murdered. He was killed by some other Jewish zealots who basically wanted the power that he had, and all the battle that would go along with all that power that going along. So he's speaking that would be a prophecy that did come true. We'll talk about more of this statement in just a minute. Let's go ahead and finish verse 4. And those who stood by said, do you revile? Or do you insult? Do you speak abusively against God's high priest? Verse number 23, verse number 5. Paul said, now this is where the rub comes down. And I'm more than convinced, what I'm going to try to convince you of in just a moment here. I do not know, brethren, that he was high priest. For it is written, you shall not speak evil of the ruler of your people. Now, does anyone in your translation say that he was the high priest? I think the King James Version does. I think the ESV does. The New American Standard does not. It's kind of generally accepted that it would be that, but the article the specific article the, is not in the text. I think Paul is saying here, for one, saying he's not high priest. There's not a high priest. There's no one who has that title, wearing that title during this time and in the last several years, or will be until the 70 AD, and there's no more high priest. There is no high priest who is serving as God would have them to serve as a high priest. So I believe intentionally he has left off the high priest, even though in many translations will translate that as an assumed that it would be the high priest, but the word "the" is not in there. I'll look back at the Greek text to see. So, and he does consent. You shall not speak evil of the ruler of your people. Now, as he's saying, the high priest, or high priest period, didn't know he was a high priest. I don't want to get ahead. Here's the question. Did Paul, out of a burst of anger, misspeak to Annas and then back up and apologize? Did he do that? Did Paul fail to have self-control as he needed? And I've even heard people say, as Paul grew older, it's evident that he became a little bit more sharp with his tongue. He was a little bit harsher person as he grew older. Anybody ever heard that before? I have. And I disagree completely with that, what we just said. I'm convinced that Paul said, at least what we read into it, is not what he actually said. And that he said, though, what was needed at that very moment. First of all, as Paul speaks, what did Jesus promise that to his apostles, that his apostles would do or be able to do when they're before kings and before leaders and before all these? What did God promise or what did Jesus promise them that they would be able to do? Exactly. You know exactly what to say is the Holy Spirit. Don't worry what you don't prepare that. Prepare what you can do. The Holy Spirit's going to let you say exactly what you need to say. So and we could look both in Mark 13, Matthew chapter number 10, and both of those say the Holy Spirit. One says the Spirit of the Father that speaks to you. In Luke it says, don't meditate what you will answer. I will give you a mouth of wisdom, and your adversaries not be able to contradict or resist. Not just the Holy Spirit, that the Father, but in Jesus Christ. He said, I'm going to be with you. We're going to be with you. Don't worry what you're going to say. So as he said, you whitewashed wall, did he apologize for the Holy Spirit? I would say absolutely not. Lynn.
So at the beginning of chapter 23, it says that Paul looking earnestly at the council. So knowing the mind of Paul as we already do, he's already read the room. And he already knows that Ananias presents himself as the high priest, that he's the one in authority. So to assume that when he says, I didn't know that he was the high priest, I agree with you. I don't think there's any way that he didn't know that this is the person who has presented himself in authority over them, because Paul could read a room.
Yeah.
And so he knew who these people were. So he was not apologizing. He was going back and using his education and his knowledge of the law to once again put them in their place.
Exactly. And the way it's worded, and it's very interesting as I played all this out and looked at it. So, and again, and this is, by the way, Ananias, this would have been about 56 AD, so about 15 years from the time Jerusalem was destroyed. It was in 59 is when Annas the high priest, or quote high priest, was assassinated. So fulfilling that prophecy, God will strike you, and God did strike him. So it's just coming down here. But he uses the Greek word oida, and what it can be translated is that I knew not that this man was the high priest, or I did not recognize that he was a high priest. So it's almost, as I look at it, it could be where it's saying it both ways. One kind of quieting some nerves down, saying, well, he is he's apologizing, isn't he? But in the statement he's saying, you really look at the statement he's saying, I don't recognize him as the high priest. And being able to calm the nerves like that, as he would, by using this very verbiage, would be a way to cool the room, to then what's about to take place, divide the room, is what he's about to do. And so as he says these things, and the word is translated recognize, this is also used in 1 Thessalonians 5, verse 12, and this is the same word, oida, is used. And we urge you, brethren, to recognize those who labor among you. Going on to describe recognizing those. So what do you do when you, and of course here, as translated, I do not know. This here, you are to know those who are, you recognize those who are around you. So this word could be to recognize. He's saying that I do not recognize this man as God's high priest. Because if he's a man of God, if he was what God would have as a man serving here, he wouldn't be this one that is described as being so overwhelmingly wicked, so unscrupulous. He wouldn't be that kind of person. So it says, I don't recognize this. Now, oida is in the imperfect tense, a little bit more to understand this, in that he hasn't recognized him in the past, and he doesn't recognize him in the present, nor will he in the future. So what he's saying, I do not know, I do not recognize him in the past, present, or future as high priest. He's just not that. As we look, see, so for Paul to say that he didn't know that Ananias was served as a high priest, it just can't hold water. Because he, as you pointed out, Lynn, he knew those guys. Matter of fact, there have been many of those within that room as Pharisees he would have probably been comrades with and working with in trying to stop the expansion of the Christian people. So as Paul would have known those people, he'd seen the crowd, he'd known all those things, and really to think about when you get to know people in a way that he had before, he knew what their hearts were, and he knew the message that he is trying to give would fall on deaf ears. And the message he's trying to give is what? Jesus is the Christ. He's the one where you can find salvation. He doesn't go there in this dialogue. If you notice, he doesn't go talking about Jesus. And notice what he does, though. He talks what they need to hear and understand so that they can do that. I like this paraphrase. This is Wayne Jackson's. He paraphrases this. And this is Paul's response. Brothers, I know that the law forbids speaking disrespectfully of a ruler, but I do not have the knowledge that this man is a high priest. To put it in a paraphrase that way. I'll be respectable, but I'm not going to show the respect for a man who is a man such as this. And again, I believe here he is. He's speaking in such a way that it wasn't an apology, but it could kind of cool the crowd a little bit. And those who would be listening, they can say, okay, Paul's being courteous, but okay, I guess he didn't recognize him as high priest, but he could be saying that he's understanding that. But again, I believe Paul saw he was going to get nowhere with these people. This crowd was the previous crowd. You remember, is a mob of people, and you think if I would have been there in the back in that temple grounds, and someone cried out saying, "Oh, this man! Look what he's done! He's defiled the temple ground." I'd have been one too. Hey, we're not going to have this in this place. It's kind of like if somebody came in here and started acting up. We're not going to have that kind of disruption in our worship here. And there'll be some that would go and help us escort that person out, wouldn't it? Now, we may not be the mob that they were, but we would want to have a sense of rightness in here. I would have been among that crowd. And Paul knew that there was a crowd such as that was there at the temple grounds when he got up, and he retold the story of his conversion, trying to convince them and turn their hearts to Jesus as the one. But this is examined. He's going to see that, okay, there's not a whole lot I can get to here, but this is what he can do in verse number 6. So Paul, again, he knew that some were Sadducees and some were Pharisees. He cried out All the council could hear, remember that 70 people around. Men and brethren, I'm a Pharisee, the son of a Pharisee. Again, he's not denying his role as a Pharisee, and even at that present state, he classifies himself as a Pharisee. You remember back when Paul was told to go and be sanctified. Can you come there in Jerusalem? Because there's tens of thousands of Jews who have become Christians. Well, how many of those tens of thousands were Pharisees? I'm sure there was a number of them, wasn't there? Because the Pharisees were ones who, as we'll look at, had a hope that the Sadducees did not have. So here it says, I am a Pharisee, and it's his present tense, he still is. And again, as a Christian, we can have different titles, can't we? I am a quilter. I am a tax preparer. I am a beekeeper. We have different titles, but what title is the most important title? What title is the title above all titles? Well, I'm a Christian, right? So, but this is a title that he could wear as a Pharisee, and it kind of sets up the sense of who he is and the mindset he has as a Pharisee, because the Pharisee has a conviction he's convinced of the resurrection. So he says, I'm a Pharisee, the son of a Pharisee, concerning the hope and the resurrection of the dead, I am being judged. He said, I'm on trial right now, and the Sanhedrin is just that. It's a trial. I'm on trial right now because of the hope of the resurrection. I know that there's something beyond this life. Now, when he said this, split them right down the middle. Here's the Sadducees, here's the Pharisees. They are on two opposite sides of this discussion. So it says, the dissension broke out. And who's the dissension between? The Pharisees and the Sadducees. The assembly is divided. The Sadducees, they say what? There's no resurrection. It goes on to say, no angel or spirit. But the Pharisees confess both. Now, let's go back and we'll look at old Annas, Annas high priest. I'll quit calling him the high priest because Paul didn't, did he? So here's Annas, and he is a Sadducee. When I'm dead, what happens? I'm just dead. So if that's going to be the case, what do I want to do? I want to be everything right here in this time to be all about me. I want to have the comforts. I want to have the riches. I want to have the power. I want to have the authority. It's because it's all about me. Because when I'm dying, it's all over. Now, there have been many people throughout the expanse of this world that has had that mindset, and they passed. I'm sure they're very surprised that there is something beyond this life. So, but there's no resurrection. There's no angel. There's no spirit. Can you see how empty it is? You see how selfish it is? But what? The Pharisees, they confess both. They acknowledge them all. So Sadducees were all about the physical. The soul dies when the body dies. Wickedness flourishing among the Sadducees. No eternal consequences. No answering for what you do. Live this life all you can. Because when I die, you're dead all over, right? Lynn.
Doyle, how do you think the Sadducees rose to such power within the Jewish nation, knowing that the teachings in the Old Testament from their forefathers, from Abraham, from Noah, from Moses, from Elijah, that all of that speaks to an afterlife?
And you're asking an opinion question, right? This is my opinion. Money. Follow the money. You look today, you can follow the money. You know, you have money, you have power. The more money you get, the more power you have. Now, could the people look and say, well, I don't like the idea of this, and I'd rather follow this? They could look, but a whole lot of it was, we're the ones in power. The Sadducees, you know, the temple grounds where they had all the animals in, they were selling and exchanging all these animals and everything. They actually had, kind of a farm, but it's a holding pen out here just for that purpose, to run it. And the exorbitant prices they charged for the animals inside the temple grounds, and the regulations they began putting on for you to be able to, oh, you can't bring that animal by here, you're going to have to leave that animal here. You can go and you can purchase an animal. Boy, they had a racket, and guess who was right in the middle of that racket? It was Annas. And the more money they have, the more power they have, the more power they look for, the more oppression, the more awful world becomes, right? Because when you have no hope, the only hope is here, it becomes very, very sad. So the division's been made, and the Pharisees are looking at that. And in the way Paul approaches it, by saying, I do not recognize this man as the high priest, it was said in a peaceful, because God does not want us to show disrespect for the rule of our people, not that he's the ruler of our people, but it was in their mind kind of click saying, that rat is our ruler to the Pharisees. That guy who's such an awful person, he's the one claiming to be ruler. He doesn't need to be ruler. And so Paul uses this and these few statements to say that the trial is all about the resurrection. It's about eternal life that we have hope for. And for those who say, he's right. No, he's not. And he mixed it up greatly. Verse 9, a loud outcry arose, an uproar, a noise. And the word here would describe ravens. If you ever had crows and they're cleaning up a pecan tree, or they're in the cornfield, all kind of ruckus. This is the outcry that is described, and it's between the scribes of the Pharisees, the party, and they protested. There's sharp contention that was going on. It's described as argued heatedly. They came to the point where we're ready to fight this out now. What's the issue here? Is there hope? Eternal life? Is there not a hope? And boy, they were going after it. So those who were the Pharisees saying, we find no evil in this man, but if a spirit or an angel has spoken to him, there's nothing wrong with. Perhaps this is the case. Now you remember when the disciples were on trial back in chapter number 5, and there was one who got up and began. They were ready to stone him right there, and his name was Gamaliel. And he got up there in the Sanhedrin and described, if these people are just like some of these other people, it's going to come to naught and it'll be gone. If like this, it's going to be gone. But if not, if it's so, we'll find ourselves fighting against God. And so, a reasoning comes to some of them. So a reasoning coming. So perhaps we shouldn't. We're going to find ourselves fighting against God. Verse number 10. Now when there arose a great dissension, the commander, fearing lest Paul might be pulled and torn to pieces, commanded them by the soldiers to be taken by force among them and bring back to the barracks. Paul is now officially under the Roman Empire. He is now in prison, yes, but the Jews cannot touch him. Amazing. God and God's plan. God's plan of protection. How's it taking place? Through God's providential care. As all this plays out, God is providentially bringing all these things together and all these players. And who has brought this about? It was those who oppose God. And God will use those who oppose Him to accomplish His purpose. So as we look at our lives, say, what's happening here? Know that God is going to, and whatever the world around us is doing, whatever troubles or struggles we might have, God is going to be taking care of us. But just as Agabus had prophesied, you remember, as he's coming into Jerusalem by this man who owns this belt, he'll be bound by the Romans. He's now in that in prison. Comments, takeaway. What's some thoughts? I'll start out by saying we can take advantage of the laws and the rules of the nation we live in to accomplish what we need to accomplish. The laws of the land, if there's tax loopholes, we can take those tax loopholes within the law. We can, as we follow, as we use the laws of the land, we can do things that will can be helpful to us. So he's about to be scourged by the Romans. Said, I'm a U.S. citizen. I'm a Roman citizen. You can't whip me. So Romans 13, verse number 1. Be subject to the governing authorities as we continue there in Romans 13. Be thinking of any takeaways we're looking at. We'll pick up there this next week, the Lord willing. And I have several takeaways that we can do a review and then go with. But be thinking of what we can learn and take away from this. Appreciate your attention.